Hello and welcome to this exclusive conversation at Colors that we are premiering for Prep Week in conjunction with Philly Fight Health Clinics. Today we're going to be talking about Black women specifically and how Black women are one of the growing groups in America to have HIV, as well as one of the smallest groups to receive pre-exposure prophylaxis, otherwise known as PrEP. Today, I am here joined with two amazing, wonderful Black women in the field of public health and social work, and we're going to be discussing some of these issues and talking about our own experiences along with them. My name is Jolie Kantav, and I'm the Health and Wellness Coordinator for Colors. My pronouns are he, she, they. To my right, I have Praise Iaware, and to my left, I have Debria Dunston-Jones, who can now introduce themselves.
My name is Debria Dunston. I'm a speech-language pathologist and a board member at Colors, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, my name is Praise Iaware. I am a clinical psychology PhD student, and my research focuses on pleasure as a mechanism for healing for folks who have experienced trauma, particularly for Black queer people, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Awesome. So, just to get this conversation started, as we are all queer Black women who have very different experiences, have come from very different places. I guess my first question to you guys would just be, what is your relationship, or what is it that you know about pre-exposure prophylaxis, otherwise known as PrEP?
I think, for me, what I know about PrEP is that it's something that you take as a preventative to protect you from HIV. And then, you see commercials about it, and I see it more frequently now, which I think that it's giving more exposure to it. So I think about it more because I'm seeing it visually on TV or on the radio or anything like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, similar to Debria, I know that PrEP is something that is used to help prevent HIV, and there have been some ads and different things, and I think about who those ads have generally been targeted to. I've seen it marketed as a preventative measure, particularly for gay people, for gay men, but that's most of what I've seen.
Yes, I've also seen a majority of the marketing marketed towards people who are born assigned male at birth, or who are men who have sex with men, or bisexual men, mostly within the marketing, the commercials, and even the language that we use around PrEP, which completely leaves out a very large group of people who are getting HIV in America, which is Black women, heterosexual Black women, queer Black women, cis Black women I'm speaking of specifically. Whereas right now, as of 2023, there have been 60% of all new HIV cases are of Black women. But we are also one of the smallest groups going out and talking to our doctors about PrEP or about other preventative measures. So in your own experience, do you feel like a part of us being left out of this conversation is rooted in just one specific problem or in some different issues that you've seen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's rooted in multiple things. I just think about this stigma that comes along with even talking about HIV. And so any kind of discussion around anything about that, even if it's preventing HIV, still people are very wary to do that. And so I think that that's a big thing. I think about the medical distrust that understandably Black people have with the medical community. And so that is something that I think also inhibits those kinds of conversations. And that distrust is understandable and very well earned, because you look at the history of what the medical system in the US has done to Black people. It makes sense there would be a lot of mistrust. And a consequence of that mistrust is that it makes it difficult to trust or even consider or hear about any new options for preventing things like HIV or other kinds of conditions.
Right. Absolutely. And I think also culturally too, it's this idea of it wouldn't be me and it can't be me. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes as just a Black woman, we kind of remove ourselves from this idea of, being exposed to HIV, but it's possible to be exposed to any other kind of STI. So why is this excluded? But I think when it's rooted in cultural perception of what HIV and how your life is affected in that way, it becomes a bigger taboo.
Right. So let's talk a little bit even deeper about the cultural issues with Black women even beginning the conversation of HIV. I remember personally growing up in a household that was very Christian-based, very heteronormatively based. And I remember hearing conversations of older Black women in my family referring to HIV and AIDS, which we no longer really refer to it as it has moved past an illness that kills rapidly. But in the midst of these conversations, they were usually rooted if there was a Black woman who had gotten HIV that they knew of or they heard of or read of on the news, or watched on the news, that they usually associated this with like a punishment from God. That if you are sexually promiscuous, that if you are engaging in sexual acts that are deemed, anti-God-like or anti-Christ-like, that this is God's punishment to you. And I think about that a lot when I think of how Black women are even afraid of even going to the doctor to get tested for STIs and STDs regularly, because there's this belief that if I'm a good woman, and I'm God's good woman, or I perform femininity to the best degree, that I'm going to be safeguarded from this. So I guess my question then would be like, in your own experiences as well, when thinking of like the religious aspect of that cultural, the religious aspect within our culture, within Black women's culture, do you think that it is imperative or even important for churches specifically to even start to have these conversations?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the church is so deeply rooted in Black communities. And I'm talking all churches, like whatever religion. You see a mosque, you see a church, you see a Kingdom Hall. Religion, people who religiously practice, they should have, access to this information where we're talking about sex. And we're talking about sex in regards to a human experience, like not sex as, if it's before marriage, you're going to hell, as this sentence to doom and eternal, burning in hell, eternal damnation.
Yeah, the gnashing of teeth.
The gnashing of teeth.
Jesus.
That's scary. You're really perpetrating that. Sex is not even a normal conversation you should be having. And the earlier you can have it, the better. But I feel like the church should be responsible to start having that, especially when people are so involved and their lives are dedicated to being a part of these religious organizations.
Right.
But yeah, I think definitely. Yeah. And God trauma is real.
God trauma is real. Especially when you think of how a lot of that, like what you said, is really rooted in the idea that sex isn't meant to be pleasurable, which is something that you're studying and receiving or writing your dissertation about, how pleasure specifically is rooted or is a tool for resistance, and how pleasure is a huge part of why most people seek out sex. And I definitely see what you were saying with that too. So I don't know if you want to speak more on that specifically.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were talking to Bria about how there's such a culture of silence around sex, and I'm thinking about who does that culture of silence serve? Who does it serve for you not to know how to feel pleasure in your own body, either by yourself or with other people? Who does it serve to not have these conversations about thinking about pleasure as important to health? Who does it serve to not be aware of these kinds of things and not have that kind of full agency and capacity over yourself? I think it serves the folks who want to have some sort of dominion or power or control over you. And so in having these kinds of conversations and sort of having the agency to be able to talk about these things, you're kind of reasserting control of yourself, your body, and your pleasure. And I think the church is very instrumental to having these kinds of conversations because, like you said, the church is really ingrained in the Black community in different religions. And so the church being a space that says, hey, this is the place where we can talk about this. Your health is important. God would want you to understand that health is important, and sex education is a part of that. So not seeing those two things as conflicting each other or contradictory, and seeing the church as a place where that can happen, I think would do so much and would do wonders for Black women and the Black community too.
Right. Especially Black women deserve pleasure. Black women deserve to feel good, and not just sexually, but in all realms. And it's very hard to even want to engage in conversations about sex and about pleasure if you're even afraid of even talking about HIV or talking about other STIs and STDs or other preventative measures. We want to have sex or we want to engage in sex, but we don't want to talk about condoms, or we don't want to talk about birth control. We don't want to talk about female condoms. We don't want to talk about all these other aspects that is engaged in this act that is completely normal and new and human and natural. And that is, like always, what happens in this country is inhibiting Black women the most. So kind of like pivoting a little bit, what other institutions have you seen or have you experienced that is causing friction in Black women's circles, Black queer women's circles, to kind of talk more about HIV and PrEP?
A big thing that comes to mind for me is, I guess, two things are patriarchy and respectability politics. This sense that to be a woman, to be a good woman, however you define that for yourself, is to be someone, like respectability politics in the sense of like you have a certain sense of decorum. Good women don't do that. Good women don't have sex. Good women don't talk in a particular kind of way. And if that's the model of respectability that you're adhering to in order to get approval from the folks who like might be important to you in your life, or the people who are around you or your social group, it's understandable why people might do that. And at the same time, it can put folks at such a disservice because you're not really being so much as in touch with what you might want or what you might need and what might bring you pleasure. And so I think sometimes respectability politics can really bump up against how living authentically. And so because when those two things are in conflict, it can make it hard to have conversations that would have someone living more authentically to their desires and their wants.
Yes.
And I would like to add too, like some internalized homophobia. I think people would like to consider themselves an ally, but when they hear things that has like been, used as propaganda to be specifically targeted to gay men, they're like, like this isn't for me. Like, I'm a Black woman, a straight Black woman. I've only had sex with straight Black men. So like that internalized homophobia that is there, that also needs to be unpacked, to really be honest with themselves too, that it could be me and it could be some other circumstances that may lead me down that road too as well.
Yes, that internalized homophobia. And even like in stories that I've heard of Black women who have gotten HIV, who've only had sex with men and having found out that it's from their partners having sex with other partners, usually other men, and then that homophobic language starts to come out immediately, even though by and large most people see cis women as automatic allies to the queer community. But as soon as it hits home for you, then it's this is a gay disease, or how dare you, or you was on the DL and blah, blah, blah. And this also inhibits Black men from experiencing pleasure, from engaging in sexual acts that they would want to, from engaging in ways that will make them feel comfortable in their own bodies. So it kind of shuts down the entire conversation. It shuts down further cures and further preventative measures. It shuts down, people's lives because Black women are dying and they shouldn't be dying in 2023 from HIV when there are so many other people, white people or cis men and other groups outside of our groups that are thriving and their lives have not stopped, but our lives are stopping, And I especially think about that with that internalized homophobia part and even the externalized homophobia with queer Black women and the assumption that if you aren't having heterosexual penetrative sex, that you can't contract HIV. So like kind of even pivoting even further, why do you think that it's even more difficult in that realm for queer Black women to discuss HIV and PrEP, especially as we are all queer Black women?
I think maybe and I can speak from like my own experience, like why I've never considered PrEP is like, it's just like, why would I need that? Like I'm not having like semen injected into me or ejaculated into me and things like that. But after having many conversations with you about your choices of being on PrEP, it kind of opened my eyes like, oh, wow, like this could be something preventative because I don't know what my life would be like in a few years or what my choices may be. And I feel like people deserve to have that autonomy and be safe while they do that with their sexuality. So, but yeah, I just think like as a queer woman, I'm, like how could I be, exposed to HIV at this point. But I think that's also rooted in my own ignorance that I kind of have to reflect too about like why is that my choice and thought process.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's real. That's really real and really vulnerable too, because even in the midst of my choice to be on PrEP, I also thought about it from that way too. It's like I don't, usually if I'm having sex, I'm asking my partners just straight up, when was the last time you got checked? Which I also think is a very important conversation everyone should have with their sexual partners, and about, their own preventative practices. And the way I saw it was, if I used birth control or I used condoms or, all of these other preventative measures, why wouldn't I also prevent myself from this? And I know it's a little different too for you because you're also married and I'm not, sadly. Right, but as I'm not too, I also think of it like even bigger scale, which is that I can't be in charge of my partner's sexual lives.
Right.
So I'm a lesbian, but I've dated girls, had sex with girls who are bisexual or pansexual, or people who are bisexual and pansexual. So they are having sex with people with different, sexual parts. So I also have to take that into accountability too when I'm thinking about it. Like, no, I may not be the one having penetrative sex, but someone who I may be having sex with has. And that's, I think, how we also need to start thinking of it. It's not simply a decision that just affects you, but everything that we do affects each other and affects our community. And we especially saw this during the coronavirus pandemic, where people finally, like, that cognitive dissonance was broken, where people were finally putting together, oh, if I'm sick, I could get other people sick, which means other people could die because of me, or other people could be hurt because of me. And I think that's how we need to look at it as a whole. Maybe I'm not the one doing it, but I know that I want to be someone who promotes health and safety in my community, and I hope that others in my community are doing the same. Yeah.
I got some chills as we were talking because I was like, I love how you framed it as community care, and really kind of thinking about it as it's not just for you. I think in our culture, in American culture, there can be such an individualistic perspective, which can be helpful in some ways, but can be harmful in others, because it really disconnects us from each other. So when we start to think of things as community care, we start to think of things like, okay, this is not only for me, but this is for the people that I'm engaging with too, that I care about. It brings a different spin to it. This is like one of my favorite quotes that I always like to say is by Octavia Butler. Yes, glorious. All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. And so it just really highlights the reciprocalness, the reciprocal nature of so many of our actions. And seeing, I think sometimes with things like PrEP or with other things, it's really marketed as an individualistic choice. Like, do this to care for yourself. Do this to make sure that you are safe, which is like a helpful message for many people. But I also wonder, if we could think about it as like, do this to help protect your community, do this to help protect the people that you care about, how that might change some of the uptake or the understanding of it too.
Love that.
Wow. Can you say that quote one more time? That was really deep. Like,
all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Octavia Butler.
That's a word.
A glorious book for anyone who hasn't read it.
I love Octavia Butler, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. I could go on and on about my sis. That is, I think community care is definitely the way we should be moving, especially as we are talking about overall liberation, because a part of this is all connected to liberation and liberating ourselves from oppression. Because it is also by design that Black people are afraid to seek medical care. It is by design, not because necessarily that the medical care itself is bad for you, but because the way it has been framed within our community very intentionally, it's made us afraid to go and seek it so that our oppressors can keep it to themselves, they can hoard it. And because of that, over generations and generations and generations of fear-mongering has created such larger issues within our community, and not just in HIV, but in so many other illnesses and diseases that affect us. So I often think about it in that way too, that yes, this affects everyone, it affects me, but also I know personally in my own life, I always want to be helping my community move towards further liberation, and further growth, and further pleasure. That's the pleasure. Black people deserve pleasure. We deserve love. We deserve care. Yes. So how can queer Black women especially pioneer these conversations? I feel that even though it is not individualistic, like I'm a savior, I'm gonna save us all, but I think there is a kind of part of that through our intersectional personalities, through our own intersectional experiences in our lives, that we have a very unique end to this conversation. So how do you see us, specifically not just us in this room, but queer Black women in general, kind of starting these kind of conversations?
And I think like this is a start. Like we are having this conversation here that will be seen by so many people on the internet. And then people like you, Joy, like where you speak up and you're advocating, no, but seriously, like advocating for it in a way because now you are representation of what a queer Black woman on prep looks like.
Right.
And look at you right now, happy, thriving, glowing, like all of the things.
Correct.
Thank you.
And
Thank
so,
you.
like, once we have that one person, and it's not a savior, but it's just that representation. Like, once we feel that connection, like, okay, I see myself in you,
Yeah.
and now I can also do that with my life and myself.
Right.
Like, that's where this can just go beyond ourselves, you know? And so I think, like, having more honest, open, like, sharing stories, having women maybe speak who are HIV positive, queer Black women or Black women in general, and just sharing like, this is my life and this is what I did and I want you to do different. But just finding those people who are able to share that and be honest. But I think you and setting up this space is just the very beginning of that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think there's something really big about living in your truth and living authentically. That when other people see that, they're like, wow, I could do that too.
Yeah.
It's such a avenue, it opens up so many avenues of possibility for people that they might not have seen for themselves.
Yeah.
And so I think us as queer Black women, having open, honest conversations about these things can encourage other people to do so as well, to do more research into the area too, and like see how they feel for themselves, as well as talk to people that they trust about these things too. I think about what we were saying at the beginning, how like messaging and marketing, like who is in those ads, who it seems to be marketed towards. So when you don't see yourself in something like that, you think that's not for me. But through these kinds of conversations, people can begin to see themselves and say like, oh, okay, I can see why this would happen. Why someone would make this decision of being on PrEP. Maybe I can make this decision of being on PrEP too.
Right. And we're definitely not pitting this as a conversation that this is the option that you must do this, go out today, go to your doctor, get on PrEP. No, this is one of many options.
One of many.
One of many options for Black women to engage in pleasure, to engage in sexual acts, and to be safe. Because safety is the root of it all, really. Yeah. So it's, and representation, like how you both brought up, representation is a huge part of how we pioneer these conversations and how we talk about them. Because you're right, if I don't see myself being marketed in something, you know, like if I'm watching a Gillette commercial, it's like I don't need a Gillette razor. I don't need to know about how it has different prongs and different things. I just move on with my life, you know what I'm saying? But that always commercial, I'm watching that, you know what I'm saying? Or whatever the case is, whatever it may be. So, and I think it's something that we should start and something that shouldn't end right here at this table, but that could continue on. So I think I especially wrote here in my notes that we should go about this not as saviors, but as sisters, as community-based as possible, because there's not one option or one solution or one cure, one size fits all anything, because everyone's very different. Their bodies are very different. Their experiences are very different. So especially, there was one other question I had too. Just one last question, I guess, as we're wrapping up this conversation. Do you feel as though PrEP could also be something that is more accepted in our communities if there were more Black doctors and Black women doctors, Black women nurses, and specifically Black women spaces in the medical field? Not that that's perfect in every regard, but do you think that this could possibly help us in some ways?
Definitely. And I think about like during COVID times when like in Philly, we had like the Black Doctor Association who were administering vaccines, you know? And so like people were like, okay, I trust them. Like I didn't trust the vaccine before then, but I trust them because they got it and they're administering it to us. So I think, yes, I think definitely Black doctors, physician assistants, those pharmacy advisors, anybody, you know, who can provide more information about this to Black people will begin to bridge that gap between like PrEP is a preventative and PrEP is available and you have access to that. I think people don't even realize this is something you have as a resource. You know,
that's another thing too. I don't think a lot of people even know what PrEP is. Most people think it's it cures HIV.
Yes.
And it
like,
does the opposite.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also like misinformation. And I think if we can have some Black people in the medical field to provide more insight on that too as well, it would definitely be helpful.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's so, like, echoing what you said, I think having people who look like you when that you're trying to receive care from, be it medical care, PT, therapy, like physical therapy or like mental health therapy, whatever it is, can make someone feel so much more at ease.
Yeah.
And then you're more open to hearing what they have to say and like trusting the information because it's coming from someone who looks like you and someone that you are more likely to trust. So I think that makes such a big difference.
Yes, it even makes a big difference in even going to get tested for HIV and for other STIs and STDs. And even thinking about if you have other autoimmune diseases or even other STDs in your body, also lowers your body's natural ability to fight off infection.
Just as we were talking, I keep thinking about these different either like literary folks or speakers or folks who have been really influential in my own life and in how I think about these issues related to community care and healing and wellness. And I think about Bell Hooks' Sisters of the Yam, and which she talks about basically tenets for healing for Black women. And one of those was the power of getting together and talking honestly together, talking in community together, holding space for each other, which Black women, we've been doing and have done in so many ways. And so just like, I think continuing to do that around so many different issues because that's how people get so much knowledge, or that's how people get so much information because you're sitting and talking with people that you trust and you're being really open about those things. So including sexual health as part of that conversation, I think would be something that's really important too. And so as we're talking about PrEP, as we're talking about HIV, I think about those spaces to be able to have those conversations in a non-judgmental, loving, caring way.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
And to not feel like stigmatized, or to not feel like, because I think it's also very hard to have conversations like this even with cis men, regardless of if you are someone who dates men or doesn't date men or just friends with men, whatever the case is. It's very difficult to even have very open, honest conversations because they aren't coming from the same experiences that you were coming from. Because if you even add the over-sexualization of the Black female body, you add in that layer of Black women who have sadly been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed, and how that also shapes our perception of our own sexuality, how that can make some Black women hypersexual or not hypersexual, and all these different ways, and how that also plays a really big role into how we even begin conversations about sexual health. Because it's very hard to even begin that conversation if people have labeled you as a hoe or as someone who's someone who deserves, like we were saying in the beginning, someone who deserves to be punished for their sexual promiscuity. And even if they haven't even been sexually promiscuous, because even Black women who, like myself or like many Black women I know, are very curvaceous, it's automatically assumed that because you have a certain kind of body that you must be sexually promiscuous or that you must be someone who has sex with a lot of people, which then makes you kind of like a target, which reminds me of what's that lyric? Never trust a big butt and a smile. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. That's the one. So it's like even that whole idea that like, oh, you don't trust no girl like that. You can't turn a hoe into a housewife and all that kind of language. It just inhibits Black women from speaking on anything around this.
And reinforces those respectability politics that we were talking about before, because you're trying to fight against the stereotypes of what people see you as of no fault of your own, like just how your body is.
Yep. Just how your body is, how your skin is, how you talk, how you hold yourself, all those things. I think about all of that. If you're a baby mom, all these different kinds of things. And I even think about the performance of femininity. And I think about the performance of the idea that if, like we were saying before, if you want to be a good woman, then good women don't need to talk about sex, because good women only have sex with one man when they're married. Right. So then there's all of that too. So it's like, oh, if you was doing it right, you don't need to talk to nobody. Talk to your man about it. So I think about that too, which completely leaves us out of it. I don't got no man to talk to about. No, I'm kidding. I don't want one. Yes. Oh, I do have one more question too. We kind of already touched on it, but how do we go about talking about it within our own inner circles, outside of a professional sense, outside of a doing a conversation on YouTube sense, how do we start to talk about it with our partners, with our friends, with our families?
I think we were saying that piece of having those conversations and making those intentional spaces for community is what's necessary. I think about how much community came together in so many ways, but it was also really fragmented during COVID-19, during like the height of the pandemic, and how some of those ways of being together still haven't really fully come back yet. And so I think we're trying to navigate this new landscape of how we can be in community with each other in ways that feel good, and sometimes like rebuilding trust with each other as well. So I think kind of continuing along in that process, continuing to be connected to others that you care for and who care for you too, and really just holding each other and seeing each other in the ways that you can.
I agree with that 100%. And I think too, just to add to everything that you just said, like the trust component is just so important. And I feel like Black women in general, they just feel like, oh, you're going to run and tell my business. And if I tell you this, can I trust you? And just really having people that you know will see you as you described, and also will hear you and direct you in the way that you should go. I feel like sometimes unsolicited advice, prevent people from having conversations.
Yes.
I feel like, misinformation, pseudoscience, also impacts like the way that, Black women perceive like, medical information or advice from other people. But I think just having like a really safe space to do that and being able to trust the people that you're conversing with about this very serious topic should be available to you.
And trust without judgment.
And trust without judgment.
Yes, without judgment, without, because I think about that. I think about how maybe even some Black women feel that they can't talk about these things because they don't want to be judged, even though they know maybe they have a friend they trust or someone that they trust, but then they're judging, oh, why would you do that? Or why did you do that? And it's like, why are we being judged in the first place? Just for being human and just for existing and living. Because you wouldn't judge someone who has cancer. You wouldn't judge someone who has lupus. You wouldn't judge someone who has some of these other health issues. But for whatever reason, usually sexual health and even mental health is always the fault of the person itself. Or you're depressed because you're just sad. Or you have this STI, STD because you did that. You went out there and you got it, so that's what you deserved. And we need to stop. We need to leave the word deserve out of the medical realm, period. Out of the health conversations, period.
I think about it sometimes as like the ways in which we police each other. We often talk about like abolish police, or at least I do. I believe in abolition.
Period.
But we sometimes I've seen things about like abolish the cop within yourself, like the pieces of you that feel the need to police the others around you. And so I really think about that as adopting a stance of non-judgmentalness, allowing, like, if people are coming to you in conversation with something vulnerable, being there and holding that, not judging them for that. And it takes work to build that skill. If you think about, most people would want someone to be able to hold them in that kind of capacity. So working on being able to hold other people in that capacity too is important.
Future Dr. Priest.
Come on now. Come on now.
You hear me?
I'm telling you. Damn. You better do that.
What's your rates?
I'm saying, you take insurance? I'm going to be there. I have a lot to talk about. A lot. Yes, speaking of community and inner circles, if you have friends about to be a therapist, is a therapist, psychologist, go to your friend, girl. Yes. Go to your friend, read a book, learn these things too. Take time to learn your own information as well. Don't just take our word for it. I think it's very important that people know things for themselves, because knowledge is power, knowledge is liberation, and you don't know until you know. Yeah. And no one knows everything, so you can always know something. Mm-hmm. You can always know something. I learned something yesterday. I learned how PrEP actually works as I was researching this. Mm-hmm. I was learning that the way PrEP works is that when you have sex with someone and the virus enters the body, how PrEP works, if you are taking it every day as prescribed, it's 99% effective. Mm-hmm. It stops the cell from reproducing itself. Mm-hmm. So it kills the cell, so it never reproduces at all. And I was like, science is really fun. Yeah. And it's had almost no side effects. All the side effects have been very mild. It has been studied for over 12 years. I also do not know that, because we also think about that language when we talk about medicines, vaccines, and people think, they just pull this out their whatever, their hoo-ha last year. And it's like, no, this has been in conversations for really over 20 years, but then in clinical trials for 10 to 12 years. And now it's, here for us in the public. So
I
even
remember you were also, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I remember you were also saying, like, the pill was one of it, but there were other ways of how it can be
Yes.
administered too.
Yes, so for people who are born AFAB, that is assigned female at birth, there is a pill version called Truvada. That's a daily pill. That was the version I started with personally first, but just in the same way I sometimes forget to take my other medicines every day. I always forgot to take it. So then they later came out with a version that's even stronger for people who were born AFAB called Apretude. And this is an injectable that you get right at the bottom of your hiney, the bottom of your back, top of your hiney. You get this shot every other month, and it is 99% effective. So you can have sex with someone who has been exposed to HIV or has HIV, and you will not contract HIV. Wow. Which is like, wow, because the big myth is that it doesn't work, and it totally works. Yeah. Especially if you are like taking the shot version, it works even more. The pill version, as long as you're taking it, I believe after the first month, if you take it at least 4 to 5 days a week, you're still around 96% effective. Mm-hmm. But it's best to take it every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And typically, the pill PrEP is covered, or the shot is covered by health insurance. Yep. So what if you don't have health insurance? How can some people maybe have access to that?
Great. For some, that's a great question, actually. For many places, especially in Philly, like with Philly Fight Health Clinics, there are plenty of free clinics that could help you to get PrEP, even if you don't have insurance or insurance that will cover it. There's so many other options to receiving it because we want as many people on PrEP as possible to reduce the spread of HIV, the transmission of HIV. So even if you don't have insurance or your insurance doesn't cover it, doesn't mean to stop talking to your doctor. Maybe you should go out and you can also speak to Philly Fight. You can also speak to the Mazzoni Center in Philly. And if you are watching this outside of Philly, consult your local state's Department of Health.
Perfect. People who use PrEP must commit to taking the drug every day or shot every 2 months. They must also see their healthcare provider for follow-up appointment every 2 to 3 months.
For more information, visit the Department of Health and Human Services page on www.usa.gov. For more information on the City of Philadelphia's plan for PrEP, visit www.phila.gov.
Awesome. And thank you so much to my lovely, amazing, intelligent, beautiful guests, Praise Irade and Debria Dunstan-Jones. I'm Jolie Cantav, otherwise known as Joy, the Health and Wellness Coordinator at Colors Organization. We thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Be safe, be blessed, and be safe.